Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for joining us. The purpose of this particular lecture is basically to introduce you to the course television journalism. As you know that in the last term, we focused more on radio journalism. So I'm going to provide a brief overview of what this course is going to be all about, and then I will focus on the material for the first week of the term. I will also talk a little bit about the assignment that is going to be due this term. So in terms of the overview, this course essentially focuses on the brief history of television in South Africa, and then it provides a necessary theoretical background in the study of television as a medium that plays a significant role in informing us of what is happening around us. It will further subject TV news to scrutiny. So that's what we are going to do. We are going to subject television news to scrutiny in the form of analysis, and also look at how television audiences receive and interpret television content. We will also look at the issues of regulations, because it's very, very important to look at regulation of TV broadcasting services in South Africa when you're looking at the history. We will further look at the impact of technological changes and innovation on television and TV news content in particular, before we finally speculate about the future of television news and broadcasting in general. So I mentioned that we will have an assessment this term, and I decided that we are only going to have one assignment, bearing in mind, of course, that this is a very, very, very short term. So that assignment will account for 50%. Of course, it will be combined with the 50% that will come from the first term to make 100%, and that will form part of your semester mark. The assignment due date, if I can say from the onset, is that it's going to be due on the 14th of October. So we want to cover this material so that by that time you should have enough material and enough time to write the quality of the assignment that we expect at this level. So to start with, the SABC, as you know already, it came into being in 1936. And I said the SABC came into being in 1936, not television, because television only started in 1976. So the SABC started in 1936 and television started in 1976. The most important thing is that at its inception, the SABC, the important thing to note is that the SABC was aimed at furthering and maintaining the interests and goals of the former National Party government. This was coupled with successive interference, in the broadcasters' operations. Obviously, that will be interference in terms of editorial content, in terms of them dictating what type of content must be broadcast, and how the broadcast stations, television channels themselves must be operated, which was, of course, problematic, because as a public broadcaster, you want to shy away from the type of control, especially if it's the control that is coming from government or a particular political party. So one thing that you need to think of, remember, television started in 1976 in South Africa, and that was way, way too late, because other African countries had already started television services. So one may ask, why was there such a delay? Why was there a delay in terms of South Africa introducing television services? The reason for that particular answer lies with the fact that there was an apprehension or fears amongst white conservatives that television, with its power to inform, to educate and mobilize the masses will eventually undermine the policy of apartheid. It will eventually undermine the interest of the government of the day and, of course, the policy of apartheid. However, this fears, ladies and gentlemen, was allayed by the Meyer Commission, which was a commission that was appointed to investigate the matter and report on the feasibility of television services. So the commission recommended that in a world that was, rapidly approaching a stage where direct reception of television transmission from overseas sources via satellites will eventually become a reality. It was important that South Africa must also have its own television services, so that it can produce its own programming, informed by the issues as they were evolving, or issues from the perspective of South Africa itself. So that was the recommendation of the Meyer Commission. The recommendation, nonetheless, was accepted by the government in 1971. However, it took further 5 years for the television to be introduced. As we said, that it was only introduced in 1976. Its first channel was TV1, which also served the white audience. The second service was in 1982, which was TV2. By that time already, Bob TV was making inroads around 1993 in Mafikeng in the northwest. And further down the lane, there was Mnet, which started its services in 1986, and all this contributed to the television landscape in South Africa in terms of trying to diversify the television landscape at the time. The SABC, by virtue of it being much older, conservative and well-funded, it monopolized the airwaves, and we noted that it was the mouthpiece of the ruling party. So there was a need, as time goes by, for transformation to take place. Transformation itself started taking place in earnest in the interregnum between 1989 and 1994, because it was already clear by that time that South Africa would eventually become a democracy. So television, by virtue of it being integral part of a thriving democracy, was very, very important or crucial that broadcasting services must be transformed to reflect the entire population, but also to support the democratic project as it was evolving here at home. So we noted already in the previous term that the body that was driving the transformation process was the IBA, the Independent Broadcasting Authority, that started in the 1990s. It is, of course, the predecessor of the present-day ICASA that we all know. So IBA made lots of progress with this transformation agenda, because at the time there was also a big concern regarding the partisan nature of the SABC, because it was more aligned to the government. As we said, it was the mouthpiece of the government. When you say something is partisan, we mean that it is biased in favor of government or a particular political party, whatever the case may be. So when the IBA started, it was more concerned with the freeing of the airwaves, and it was also concerned about the political control of broadcasting services, but it did a lot of work, and indeed by 1995 the SABC had transformed significantly. It had over 20 radio stations, for example, and of course 3 television channels. The work of the IBA continued, and that transformation that was started by the IBA, made lots of progress. As you know, that today the SABC has transformed into an entity that reflects on the entire population. So, for example, it offers several television channels and broadcast in 11 languages, and these are the 11 official language that we have in South Africa. Further, South African viewers now have a choice between the SABC channels and other television channels such as Mnet and ETV. There is also Newsroom Africa, and at one stage we also had what was that, ANN7, which was nonetheless short-lived, and it was because of the allegations of corruption. As you know, it was aligned to the Gupta family that we hear a lot about these days, even at the, what is that particular commission that is currently sitting, the Commission of Inquiry into the State Capture. So that there was lots of those revamp, and those revamp, importantly, of course, were aimed at creating a new and dynamic broadcasting environment that is favorable to all sectors of society, including people of different races, genders, women, and children. So that was a very, very important development indeed. Television broadcasting is now diversified, especially with technology that allows viewers to subscribe to other channels. For example, if you think of the multi-choice, so those are, more or less, the important background, or a very, very brief of history of television from the time it started up until the present, and some of the factors, at play when you're looking at the history of television in South Africa. Now, the other issue when you're looking at television really is the issue of representation, because television itself involves a great deal of representation. The concept embodies the idea that media construct meanings about the world. Representation in the media, ladies and gentlemen, can validate or challenge existing beliefs. Media texts have the power to shape an audience knowledge and understanding about very, very important issues. So it is very, very important that as media producers, those people who are producing content or somebody who's involved with the production of media messages, you are aware of this particular issue, so that when you produce the message, you are looking at it critically to make sure that there is less of problems, like problems relating to stereotypes, that can be very, very problematic, And I'll give you an example of, television, the power of television, to exacerbate certain or even cultivate and reinforce stereotypes. Those of you, who travel a lot, if you go overseas, it does not matter if you come from the Sandtons of this world, Brightons and other, suburbs, when you say you're from South Africa, most people overseas will always think of, the animals that, you are from this, and, basically, and because that is informed by the images that, they see on television. So that is the type of stereotypes that they would have as a result of this particular television content. And this is a clear example of how television content and the issue of representation is very, very important, so that we think critically about the message that you produce. What type of stereotypes am I likely to cultivate by framing this message this way? By selecting this aspect of reality, what type of stereotypes am I bringing to the fore? What am I disseminating to the vast audiences out there? So it's very, very important, because if you think thoroughly about that, then the message that you put across will have very little chances of, embedded stereotypes, because you are thinking about that and you are able to address that before it reaches the audience. So that is very, very important, because there is a particular process as a person who's, when coming to the process of representation in television content. Because when you are going to cover a story, for example, and I want to emphasize this because, especially when coming to TV news, where journalists are working under lots of pressure and they have very, very little space to convey their stories, space in the television as a media itself, but also they've got very, very little time to think about what they can put across, So they are rushing to put whatever content that they want to put across together. So there is that stage where you think about what you are going to do, conceptualizing stories, which is what goes before scripting, what goes on before scripting, and then there is the selection of what to include in the media text, and that will be followed by anchorage, which will include the wording, the text, captions and supers that go along with images to give those pictures a certain meanings. And by the way, when I talk about supers, it's just a television lingo that we use in the newsroom, and it comes from the fact that when you are typing something on the screen, you are superimposing on an image. So it coming from the fact that you are going to superimpose that on a particular visual or on a particular content that is already on the screen. That's basically what supers are all about. And then we do have those stereotypes that we talked about, which is more or less like an overgeneralized images, that informs idea about a particular thing, so it's very, very important, because stereotypes themselves are oversimplified representation of content, and they tend to be generalization. They will eventually be generalized. So when you're selecting something, make sure that you are very, very careful, because that which you are selecting and putting across is going to be a reference point of reality about that particular issue. The issues of ideology, for example, also is very, very important. Ideology being a set of ideas or beliefs consciously or unconsciously held by media producers when they are producing content, which are often represented in the media text that they produce. So you think about this thing when you are producing content or when you are analyzing content. You can analyze content from an ideological perspective, So those are very, very important aspects to know about as a student of television journalism. So the media content will obviously represent only a partial and selective view of reality. In this way, television news has the potential to cultivate or reinforce particular stereotypes, as I said, So positive or negative, whatever the case may be, because stereotypes are essentially negatives. They've got negative connotation, but you can also reconstruct if you think carefully about the message that you're putting about. You can deconstruct stereotypes using television content. And then there is also the issue of hegemony that whenever you are analyzing content, you can also think about. Because hegemony comes from the fact that in a society where there is power relation, you will be having one dominant group, and then some other groups that are often oppressed by one group. So it's not easy for a particular group to oppress other groups without the other groups revolting against this particular oppression from this particular dominant group. So how do the dominant group go about ensuring that it is still able to control or dominate weaker groups, without much challenges? It comes up with a way by which to oppress this particular group, by ensuring that this particular group, mechanism that will be put in place by the dominant group, it will be accepted by the weaker groups as something that is natural, something that is normal, something that is there. Because once you accept something is normal, there will be no need for you to challenge it, saying that, oh, this is just the way things are, so there is no way, there is no need to challenge. And this is where the hegemony comes in, because the media, or television in particular, which is very, very powerful, becomes some sort of a hegemonic device, for the dominant group, to control the weaker group. It may be through the content that it will broadcast the type of content that support the ideology of the dominant group, and because that message is broadcast over time, so eventually, because mass communication literature shows that when something is broadcast in the media over time, in terms of agenda setting and cultivation theory, people tend to accept it as axiomatic, or something that is there, and once you accept that is what it is, you would not necessarily feel the need to challenge. So this is where hegemony comes in as a factor in as far as television and television messages are concerned. So we did, of course, mention also the issue of regulation that we talked about, because if you think of regulation, in the last term we talked about regulation, we talked about bodies such as ICASA, but there's also another body, the BCCSA, which is a body responsible for adjudicating disputes, or if you are having any issue with any broadcast content, you can approach the BCCSA and it will be able to look into the problem and make a finding to make sure that the type of content that you are complaining about is not problematic. If it is problematic, a particular television station will be taken to task. It will be reprimanded accordingly, and then the content may also be taken off air. So, just by way of recap, you must know the brief history, when the SABC started, when television started, some of the factors that accounted for the delay of television in South Africa, the concept of representation, what does it involve, the process of representation, issues of ideology, and hegemony. So these are just some of the aspects that you have to remember, and you must be able to discuss. You must have a thorough understanding of how they relate to television content in particular. So in a nutshell, I think that's more or less what this lesson or this lecture is all about. There are further notes that you can consult, and also I'm available. Feel free to send me questions via our tutors. Our tutor, Ms. Mashego. Then we will be in touch, and also feel free to send emails. But please, when you send emails, because I got lots of emails and sometimes I don't get the chance to read through all the emails, so it's much better if you use the WhatsApp platform and address your query to our tutor, and then the tutor will channel any other questions that she cannot respond to me, and then we'll be able to take it from there. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. See you on the other side. Bye for now.